Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, coming at you with another solo video. And for this one, we're going to get into the camp notes. We've had a lot of new headlines coming out of training camp. And so I think it's important at this point to go over all of these new updates that we're getting and try to make this a weekly thing where we try and go over the week's news. We're going to talk about 8 new situations here. A couple of them are Superflex related, so I think hopefully a lot of you will be bearing with me on that because we did get some quarterback news that I want to go over. And without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to go over is the Puka Nacua knee injury. He's been labeled week to week, but I'm not entirely sure that this is as serious of a knee injury as we initially thought it might be. When you hear week to week, it can get scary. We did get an update that it was a bursa sac issue and that it's nothing structural. But I will say, with a first round pick, you don't necessarily want injury concerns surrounding that player, right? So for me, I'm going to be pushing down Puka quite a bit until we hear that he's back in practice or until we hear that he's going to be a full go for week one. I think that might go hand in hand a little bit with the fact that Cooper Kupp is also lighting up camp. So again, I don't know that the Cooper Kupp thing should necessarily knock down Puka Nacua. I think that, they could just be running through Cooper Kupp's part of the playbook during his time lighting up camp. So I wasn't going to downgrade Puka because of any of the news around Kupp. I will, though, move him down because of this knee injury. I think depending on how risk averse you want to be, I'm probably going to move him down to like wide receiver 13 for the time being, right before Drake London, just after Brandon Ayuk. And obviously we might be getting news on Ayuk. I'm not going to cover that in this one. We're going to wait until we hear official news on that one. But if you want to be even more risk averse than that, I could see moving him down, below like a DJ Moore down to like Deebo Samuel, somewhere in that area, 15, 16, 17, anywhere in that area, I think is fine at this point for Puka. If you want to be risk averse. Now, this could be one of those things where, he ends up being fine and he ends up performing. And this was the time, in draft season to be able to get Puka at a discount, but I'm going to be passing on him. I already was kind of thinking he was a little high. I had him ranked at wide receiver 8. He was usually going ahead of that. But I am really concerned here about it affecting not only his availability, but also his camp reps. He's a second-year player, getting into the swing of the offense again, getting your footing, kind of starting to put together your second-year preparation, I think is all important early in training camp and throughout training camp, and he's not going to have any of that time afforded to him anymore. So I do think that I'm going to be hesitating quite a bit more on Puka Nacua than I was before I heard this news. The second piece of news that we got out of camp this week was, and within the last day or so, is Christian McCaffrey has a calf strain. They did tell us there's going to be no preseason work, but I don't know if that really tells us anything. I really don't think that that's going to really impact like what we should think about McCaffrey because he's not going to play in the preseason. I think it was likely he wasn't going to play in the preseason anyways. I don't know that he really needs that work. He's a very proven commodity. He's one of the best in the league. He's one of the best to ever do it. So maybe he was going to get a drive or two in the preseason. So that part of the news story doesn't really mean anything to me. And I think for now, we're going to just leave him where he's at in his draft spot. Maybe he ends up falling to the 3rd overall pick. Maybe the 2 receivers, CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill, go in front of him. But I don't imagine he's going to slip past 3. And my guess would still be that he goes 1st overall. Maybe you pick like Josh Allen in front of him in a Superflex league, a couple of the other quarterbacks in front of him in a Superflex league. But overall, I still expect him to be a 1st-round pick across the board. And until we hear anything more significant about this, I don't think it's going to affect his draft stock at all until we hear something more severe. So at this point, right, if you're not a Superflex drafter and you have found our channel and are watching us, this is probably the section of the video where you might want to like skip a couple players because we're going to get into Bo Nix and into Sam Darnold. And those two guys are not going to impact your drafts at all if you don't play in Superflex. But for our Superflex audience, let's get into these 2 quarterback situations. And so kicking it off with Bo Nix, right? He got listed 3rd on the depth chart. And I don't think that this is smoke, right? That was my note on this. I think that this is a good thing for the Broncos to have put out. I think it would be good for the Broncos if he is not their starter in week 1. And they listed Jarrett Stidham, who is the quarterback who came in and played the last 2 games after they benched Russell Wilson last year. And so we did get a look at kind of what the offense would look like. And another year, if he is preparing to be the starter and he's getting all the first team reps, I think that, he can be serviceable in a way that I was very afraid Bo Nix wasn't going to be able to. I was concerned that Nix just wasn't going to be an impact player at all, and that he was really going to be a drag on the skill position players in the offense. But now I genuinely feel like for Cortland Sutton, that's going to be a big, not a big boost to his value, but I feel much better about his ADP where he's going, and I feel like I can put him back on my board. We're gonna release our wide receiver 26 to 40, and Sutton's not anywhere close to that. I don't even have him in my top 50. So now I might push him, back into the top 50 and feel a little bit more confident about drafting him in the 11th round of drafts. So overall, a little bit happier about the Broncos offense. Obviously, Javonte Williams is the main other piece there. Jaleel McLaughlin maybe to end of draft type of thing. So I think Javonte maybe is a little bit stronger of a pick than we otherwise would have thought with Bo Nix. And, Stidham is going to be able to get him the ball in the passing game maybe a little bit more too. So I'm not rooting against Bo Nix. Again, I think it's just from a fantasy and objective look at what their offense is going to be. I think under Stidham at this point in the season where we're at right now is a much better situation for all of the Broncos skill position players that you would be considering drafting. And then the last one on this slide, right, is Sam Darnold listed as QB1 for the Vikings. I think this one is bigger news for 12-team Superflex leagues than maybe it's going to get credit for, because if he's going to win the job at a camp, he's going to be Superflex relevant, right? There's a situation where he could get drafted as QB 27, he's performing as QB 18, and he's just automatically a starter in 12-team leagues faster than we would even expect. So I've been resisting Darnold as the starter just all offseason. I thought with all of the draft rumors around JJ McCarthy, right, the Vikings were going to try and go up to 4. And then they kind of figured out through the draft process that there wasn't really a lot of other buzz around McCarthy. There weren't other teams necessarily trying to trade up for McCarthy. So they only ended up having to go up 1 spot to get him. But the Vikings and McCarthy were tied together the entire pre-draft process. I just assumed that was going to mean that they wanted to turn the keys over to him as soon as possible. And so to me, I thought, look, McCarthy's going to come in. He's going to be expected to be the starter. And, when we get this first depth chart information that Darnold isn't going to keep him out of that spot, Darnold's not a special enough player to keep him out of the spot. But I have been proven wrong, right? So far on the draft, on the initial depth chart. And so I really think that Darnold in this system, right? O'Connell in the Vikings system is very good for quarterbacks. You saw what it did for even like Nick Mullins last year, right? And Kirk Cousins before he went down. So I do think that there's upside here for a guy like Sam Darnold who can come in and the veteran presence and has always had pretty good talent. This is going to be the best situation, I think, that he's going to be the starter at a camp in. Obviously, you got a couple starts with 49ers, so like that's a little different. But this is something that I could see possibly working out in his favor, and for fantasy managers in 12-team leagues that decide to take a chance on him in round 10, 11, 12, depending on where he settles in the quarterback rankings as we get a little closer to the start of the season. So I play in a couple 12-team Superflex leagues. I'm getting very much more excited to draft Darnold, and obviously he's got the weapons around him, right? I mean, he's got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison on the outside. He's going to have Hawkinson back week 4 or 6, somewhere in there, and they got Aaron Jones in the backfield, who's an awesome pass catcher. So I really think that Darnold is in a good position to succeed here. All right, so going into our next 4 situations here. The first one on this slide that we're going to go over is Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears were listed as co-running back 1s on the initial depth chart. This is obviously much better for Spears than it is for Pollard. I was of the mind early in the offseason when Pollard signed that, he got the money, he's going to come in and take the Derrick Henry role, and that he was going to come in and kind of take over the backfield. and that Spears would kind of be relegated to the same level of involvement that he was last year, passing downs. If they're down big, he's going to get a lot of snaps, but maybe not necessarily translate that into a ton of production. But I have also, again, been proved wrong on this point. I think now that, the ADP has stayed close for these guys, but now I think there's a legitimate case to be made that Spears should be going ahead of Pollard. And I don't think that's going to happen. But if Pollard is the one getting the early down work and is going between the tackles and is working a lot in between the 20s, and Spears is also getting some of that work, like a bigger piece of the pie than he did last year with Henry, and is also going to handle the passing down work. I think that Spears has a opportunity here in an offense that could be maybe a little better than we expect, especially with the addition of Calvin Ridley. And so, these guys, again, they're both going outside the top 30 at running back or right around 30 at running back. So, if you start wide receiver heavy or you start quarterback heavy and you're looking for a possible starter a little later in your draft, drafting one of these guys is great for that situation, and just pray that you get the right one and that you end up getting an RB2 out of the situation. So, again, I do like both players. I think Spears is very talented. He was a highly rated prospect coming out of college last year. Pollard, he used to be the guy that we looked at as the high upside. Why doesn't this guy get more touches? And then he just didn't live up to it for one season, and now we're kind of like throwing him aside. So I do still think that, overall that this is a talented backfield that, it would be wise to try and get one of if you did wait on running back for a long time in your draft. The next guy that we're going to talk about on here is Jonathon Brooks. To miss the start of the season, I was pretty disappointed about this. A lot of the draft, discussions around him was hyping up that he's going to be ready for training camp. He's going to be ready for the start of the year. And I was always super skeptical of that because he had a November ACL tear. And that's just really hard to turn around and be ready for full go in September. And it doesn't look like he's going to be ready, right? And they're targeting week 3 or week 4. And so I'm going to continue to push Brooks down. I just struggle with this one. I know that over the second half of the season, he'll likely be the starter, but how effective is he going to be? How many guys do we see it takes so long? Even the elite talented guys like Breece Hall last year, it took him so long to get going. And then, he was great starting in like week 13. But you look the year before with like J.K. Dobbins, and he was going in round 6 or 7 of Superflex drafts, and he just didn't get right. And then he needed a cleanup procedure, and then it just was kind of a nightmare to own him. So I'm a little concerned that's what it's going to be like with Jonathon Brooks. If you're in Dynasty League, I think Brooks is still the top running back to take, him or Benson. But, I just struggle with a guy that's not going to be playing here early in the season as taking over and being a big part of your plans from a fantasy football perspective. I talked about Kupp at the beginning of the video, right? So I wanted to make sure we hit on him here as well. And Puka is currently hurt, right? So it's like we got this report before we even found out Puka was hurt, that Cooper Kupp is all the way back. That's a scary way to put it to me. If people are there and seeing him perform at full health and looking like he's dominating, right, we're probably going to be too low on him. We're ranked, I ranked him at 22 in our wide receiver video. And I've seen a lot of ranking sets have him, or a lot of people discussing him as like a top, borderline top 20 receiver. And if Puka is going to potentially miss any time and he looks fully healthy, we're not that far removed from seeing like one of the best 22 game stretches from a wide receiver ever. Cooper Kupp 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and the first half of 2 seasons ago. So, I know he dealt with injuries since then pretty consistently. But he was pretty good last year, even when he was dealing with injuries. He missed the first 4 weeks, but after that, he's a top 20 wide receiver. And so if he is healthy and he is going to be getting all the camp reps and maybe the playbook, what I said at the beginning of the video, right, is that he's probably looking that good because they're running through Kupp's portion of the playbook, right? And so obviously he's going to be lighting it up when they're running through all of the plays where he's the number one read, right? So when he's open, he's the number one read. Stafford and him obviously have a connection. There's no doubt that they're going to look good in camp. So I think that that's something that we should expect to see. But saying he's all the way back and it's like an injury thing, I think is very encouraging from Kupp. And I would be drafting with confidence at this point. And I'm probably going to look at trying to move him up. I mean, the thing is I'd have to move him over like, guys I really think are going to be good, the guys that I really like, but I could possibly move him up behind or in front of DJ Moore, up into that wide receiver 15, 16 area and feel pretty good about that. So that's my take on Kupp and what this means in terms of rankings. And then I saved my maybe most exciting piece of news for last. And this one, I say most exciting because this is major confirmation bias for me. I was saying even after the Zach Moss signing early in camp that I don't necessarily think that we should just be jumping on the Zach Moss bandwagon. I think Chase Brown is an extremely talented player. He's going into his second season. He showed he was explosive, and they moved off Mixon before they had Moss in place. So, to hear that he's taking the majority of the first team reps, the offensive line, somebody came out and said on their offensive line that if they were allowed to play fantasy football, that they'd be taking Chase Brown as their first running back. Obviously that's a little exaggerated, right? I mean, it's his teammate and seeing him play well. But I think, the coaching staff is talking about how consistent he's been, how reliable he's been in the offense. And he's an extremely explosive player. He's really good pass catcher. Obviously the play, it's probably tired at this point, but the play he had last year where he had like a 60-yard touchdown reception, took a wheel route all to the house up the right sideline. So, if we are expecting him to be the starter and he's going to get ranked as, running back 35, that's just going to be way too low. We're going to release running backs 21 through 35. I have him ranked at running back 28 currently, only one spot behind Moss, but only a couple more camp notices or camp reports of this is going to have to continue for me to move him ahead of Moss. So I'm definitely getting very excited about Chase Brown. He is somebody that I want to draft. He is somebody that is still going late. So if you're drafting, I cannot stress enough, make sure you're drafting Chase Brown, even if you have to draft him around earlier than you would think, to make sure you get him on your team at this point, and drafting him as RB 28, I wouldn't even think is a reach at all. I would definitely be taking him ahead of Jonathon Brooks at this point. I'd be taking him ahead of Pollard, ahead of Spears, because I really think that the talent is going to shine through here. The offense overall should be really good. And so I'm very excited to draft Chase Brown this season. All right, and with that, just a quick catch up on the camp notes. We'll start doing these every week, and I look forward to talking to you in the next one.